There's one other thing that I wanted to share, and that was a little update. You know, the other night I mentioned to you that Mr. Sears had been in the hospital for some minor surgery, and he was recovering, and that he had on Friday. And I called him last night to see how he was doing, and he asked me to express something to all of you. He said, see if I can remember this right. He said, thank all those folks for their prayers. They were very effective and they helped a lot. And he said, in fact, I'm coming out roaring. And he said, tell them it's all it's America's fault, and nothing can hold me back now. The other night, you know, we talked, there was a discussion really about the preparation for the Holy Year. And one of the things that the Universal House of Justice has written is that we should look at the Holy Year as a special time, and that it is a time to pause and to appreciate the tumultuous record of events which have brought us to this point, especially since the time of the ascension of Baha'u'llah. And as I've given some thought to that and read and started preparing for the Holy Year myself, I've come to look at this time and to try, and in my trying to appreciate this tumultuous record of events, it's occurred to me that there are some themes. And I wanted to share with you some things that I've been thinking about, some of the writings that have helped me understand this time, and share with you this context that's been developing in my mind, primarily from, of course, the writings of Shoghi Effendi. And three major themes come to my mind, and I wanted to share those with you briefly this morning. The first theme that I'll talk about briefly, I'll talk actually about the first and second theme fairly briefly, and then the third one emphasize a little more because it's more personal to me. The first theme has to do with something in the writings that we call the twin processes. The second one is something called in the writings the dialectic of crisis and victory. I know some of you may not be able to read that very well, but it's just actually maybe more for me. Just processing things and reminding me where I'm at here. The third one, though, is one that I'm going to speak a little more extensively about, and something that I found some interesting letters from Shoghi Effendi about recently. And that's an idea of ransom. So those are the major themes that I wanted to, that have given me kind of a context within which to understand this tumultuous record of events, the ministry of Baha'u'llah, and particularly the ministry of Abdu'l-Baha and Shoghi Effendi since the ascension of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah, in this first theme, Baha'u'llah said that soon will the present day order be rolled up and a new one spread out in its stead. He said the world's equilibrium hath been upset through the vibrating influence of this most great, this new world order. Mankind's ordered life hath been revolutionized through the agency of this unique, this wondrous system, the like of which mortal eyes have never witnessed. And Shoghi Effendi explains that there are these two great processes at work. He calls them in one place the greater plan of God and the major plan of God and the minor plan of God. He explains that, or actually the Universal, I have in a letter from the Universal House of Justice, they write, we're told by Shoghi Effendi that two great processes are at work in the world. The great plan of God tumultuous in its progress, working through mankind as a whole, tearing down barriers to world unity, and forging humankind into a unified body in the fires of suffering and experience. This process will produce in God's due time the lesser peace. So we can see that it's actually the Universal House of Justice did say in one letter recently that we've now entered the darkest hour before the dawn. They mentioned that the second process, the task of breathing life into this unified body, of creating true unity and spirituality, culminating in the most great peace, is that of the Baha'is. That's the plan that the Universal House of Justice gives us from time to time, and that our National Spiritual Assembly helps us understand in the context of what we need to do here in America. So really, in another way you could think about this, there are two processes at work. One is integrative, and the other is disintegrative. And they're happening simultaneously. But they're actually not this steady over time. They're not like this. In fact, if the image I have from the letters of the Universal House of Justice is that maybe the deterioration was occurring more like this. And we've come to 1991, and it's almost like it's been like this. That it was deteriorating at a certain rate, but the House of Justice said that the deterioration has accelerated. But it's sort of like I've said before, there's the good news and the good news. Because what this does, of course, is prepare humankind for the reception of these teachings. Because there are these barriers, our hands are tied, there's this fabric of the old world order that's almost like an obstacle, preventing the world from absorbing these new teachings and setting up these new institutions. The other good news is that at the same time that this process is accelerating, so is the process of this integration, the work of the Baha'is. And you know, there's this relationship, frankly, that I've noticed, and actually that the House of Justice has pointed out, Shoghi Effendi and the Master have written about, this relationship between the spiritual and the material. It seems that as we form national spiritual assemblies and local spiritual assemblies and gain endowments and build buildings on the ark and build natural cars or houses of worship around the world, that when there are these physical developments, actually, you know, that we can see them on paper or photographs of them, there are corresponding events in the old world order, but that are just the opposite, deterioration. Look at what happened when we built that seat of the Universal House of Justice on Mount Carmel. That magnificent building that took years and years and millions of dollars in sacrifice from all of the friends around the world to build. Look what happened in the Middle East at that time, and all the believers and the ransom that required, but the deterioration of the governments in that part of the world. Now imagine what's going to happen. Now, instead of building one building on the ark, we have 5 major projects. Imagine now the corresponding events that will occur in the old world order in terms of its deterioration. Already look at, I mean, just maybe I'm imagining this, but friends, tell me you know better. As soon as the House of Justice announced that they began work on the first project on Mount Carmel, that of the terraces, the Soviet Union fell apart. I mean, there wasn't even a delay. Now that's just the beginning. You watch. We have this insight, friends. You watch, every time they dig a little hole over there, or put a brick in place, or hang some marble on the building, just look around in the newspapers and see what's happening. It's going to be this perfect correspondence between these two processes. And they're speeding up. Like I said, 5 major projects. And frankly, I hate to think about the control that we have in our hands, because this really is the major plan of God as well. But these two plans, the major and minor, work together. And we have a lot to do with the other plan. We can hasten that by contributing to the building projects on the ark. By teaching and bringing more into the faith. Because these victories correspond with crises. And crises correspond with victories. And that's the second theme that I wanted to talk about. The Universal House of Justice wrote recently, you know, the House of Justice writes to us Baha'is around the world, and they tell us step by step what we need to do to take advantage of this time. Now, I'm not talking about this decade or this part of the century or whatever. This year, this month, they write to us and they say, it's time for the friends to do this. The friends must now do this. Really, it's earth-shaking. And if the faster we respond, it's like there are this window of opportunity opens up. And the House of Justice says, go through now, because it will close up. House of Justice wrote recently, and they said, now with the entrance of the faith on the world scene, we call upon the believers everywhere not to allow themselves, even for one moment, to be perturbed by any increase in opposition to the cause. Rather, let them deepen their understanding of the creative interaction between crisis and victory. It seems that as we study this tumultuous record of events that have occurred since the ascension of Allah, actually since the beginning of the faith in 1844, we'll see that there is this dialectic. You know what a dialectic is? It's sort of like this. This is my simple understanding. There's something, I won't get real technical here because I can't, frankly. But there's this thing called a thesis, right? That's the way we're doing things, right? And then it's opposed by something called an antithesis. Say that 10 times real fast. There's this clash. And out of it is born a synthesis. A growth, a hybrid, something better. But as soon as there's this synthesis, it becomes a thesis. Right? And it's opposed by an antithesis. Which produces the synthesis. And then the synthesis becomes the thesis. And it goes on and on and on like that. The House of Justice showed the offending, and the central figures have said that this is how growth occurs. Particularly as we look at the faith and the way it's developed, is we've had this opposition, either from within the faith or out from outside the faith. There's been this clash, and out of it has come this magnificent victory. And it seems like the greater the clash, the more serious the crisis or the opposition, the greater the victory. It corresponds as well. And it keeps going. In fact, the Guardian said that our history of read or write is like something that's pulsating. That we go ahead and ahead and ahead, and we get this opposition, and then we sail ahead. And we get opposition, we sail ahead. And that's the way it goes. And the House of Justice is saying, please, friends, deepen your understanding of the creative interaction between this crisis and victory. So friends, as you begin to pause now during this holy year upcoming, to try to appreciate the tumultuous record of events you'll notice this theme. It's a context within which you can understand how this faith grows and how it will grow in the future. Now, the third theme that I want to spend just a little more time on is this idea of ransom. And it relates very closely, frankly, to the other two. They're interwoven. But particularly to this idea of crisis and victory, because that's the way growth occurs organically. And we're organic, so growth occurs in us this way too. I could quote so many of the hidden words and tablets from Abdu'l-Baha and Baha'u'llah about the need to purge, that through tests and difficulties we become purified and develop. That's the way it goes. We run into something we don't know how to deal with, something that causes impatience or anger or whatever, and it's a test. And when we respond in a spiritual way, the way Baha'u'llah is instructed, then we grow. And if we don't, we get the test again until we grow. God arranges everything. Just like collectively these things happen, it happens with us. Now, Shoghi Effendi said in one letter that life is a process of trials and testing. Now, I want to ask you to consider this very carefully, because it seems like in this old world order, it seems like if a person has a test or a difficulty or is struggling in some way, they're viewed by others around them as somehow being deficient or stupid or whatever. In fact, all of us go to great lengths sometimes to try to hide our difficulties in our tests. In fact, many of us and many of the people in the society go to great lengths not to feel the pain, pursuing activities like drugs and alcohol and so on, to try to mask the idea, or buying things, trying to sort of not give the appearance at all that we're having tests and difficulties, almost like we're denying this process that's part of our life as human beings. Well, the Baha'is come along. In fact, Abdu'l-Baha even said, let's try to help our children become accustomed to hardships. Let's try to help our children understand that that's life. The tests and difficulties and adversities are part of life, and that's how we grow. In fact, the Guardian said, these tests, contrary to what we are prone to thinking, are good for us and give us stamina and teach us to rely on God. Now, Abdu'l-Baha said one time, he said, I wish to train you. I wish to train you until you have no other thought, no other motive, no other wish than to serve the cause of Baha'u'llah. And he said, here's how I'll train you. He said, through my training, can you imagine a trainer like Abdu'l-Baha? Through my training, you must become so fitted to spread the glad tidings of the Abha kingdom that you will follow in the footsteps of the manifestations of God, who suffered a great deal. In Persia, he said, Abdu'l-Baha said, in Persia, there is a wonderful breed of horses which are trained to run long distances at very great speed. They are most carefully trained at first. They are taken out into the fields and made to run a short course. At the commencement of their training, they're not able to run far. The distance is gradually increased. They become thinner and thinner, wiry and lean, but their strength increases. Finally, after months of rigid training, their swiftness and endurance become wonderful. They're able to run at full speed across rough country, many parasangs of distance. At first, this would have been impossible. Not until they become trained, thin and wiry, can they endure this severe test. look what's coming. This rise, this increase in the integrating and constructive forces of the cause correspond with these tests, like I mentioned, crisis and victory. That's what's coming for us. And Abdu'l-Baha said he's training us. He said, in this way I shall train you. Cam. Little by little, until your powers of endurance become so increased that you will serve the cause of God continually, without other motive, without other wish. This is my desire. So he's training us like these horses, a little bit at a time, until we become thin and wiry spiritually. So we have great endurance. Now ye, Abdu'l-Baha said, now ye. He said, in this tablet he talked about his own suffering and test. He said, now ye as well must certainly become my partners to some slight degree and accept your share of tests and sorrows. These afflictions shall be the cause of great advancement. It's that ransom. It's that ransom. We're giving up so the cause can progress. It's part of our theology. It's part of our understanding of our relationship to our Creator. Friends, it's so important that Abdu'l-Baha said that these afflictions shall be the purest bounties and bestowals and a token of thine acceptance at the divine threshold. In other words, these afflictions, these adversities, these tests and so on, rather than being something we should be afraid of or sorrowful about, are a sign, according to Abdu'l-Baha, of our acceptance at the divine threshold. My God. If we're not being tested, I'd be afraid. If we're not having difficulties in our personal lives, I'd look around and say, what's wrong with me, God? I'm not pure enough? These are a sign of our acceptance at the divine threshold. You know, there was one person that demonstrated this so brilliantly in the history, you probably knew this was coming. But one of my heroes in the faith is a man whose name was Haji Mirza Hyder Ali, and he was from Islam. Many of you have read stories about him. This person, he knew about this, that this was a sign. And he knew about what Baha'u'llah said, that nothing but that which profiteth them can befall my loved ones. Baha'u'llah said, even or odd, thou shalt win the wager. We can't lose. And one time, when Hyder Ali had to leave Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah intimated to him that he would see him again. And he always knew about this promise. And even though he was imprisoned, beaten, tortured, humiliated, and then banished to a prison in the Sudan. And when he went down the river on this prison boat, and then he was tied up in a bag, like a gunny sack, with another Baha'i, and hung over a camel upside down, one on the other side. And he went through the desert to this prison in that manner. He said, he and the other Baha'i were laughing. He said it was torturous. He said our heads were hitting the ground as it was going, mile after mile, day after day through the desert in this sack. He said we were laughing and joking. All through this, 10 years he was there. But he was always happy because he had this promise that he would see Baha'u'llah again. He took him literally. He said, I don't worry. I know I'm going to get out. I'm happy. I'll see the blessed beauty again. And he did. After 10 years, he got out. He was dropped off on this port in Arabia, was wandering around, and all of a sudden ran into this fellow that was speaking Persian. You've heard this story probably. It was a relative of Mr. Aziz Yazdi. It was his father. It was a wonderful story. I can't tell the whole thing this morning, but I can just tell you that Mr. Yazdi's father was summoned by Baha'u'llah and said, go to Arabia. And so he got on the boat and he went to Arabia, right? And as it was sailing, he thought, I forgot to ask why. He forgot. He said, I should have clarified that, you know? Clarify these expectations here. So he didn't know what happened. He just grabbed a bag of money and got on the ship and went, right? So he got off the ship, he's wandering around, and boom, there's Hyder Ali, who just got off the ship and he's wandering around. And he knew exactly why. And they embraced and he got back on the ship and they took him to God. He was joined with his beloved, the blessed beauty. But he never gave up hope. But sometimes, you know, we're tested and we forget. In fact, Hyder Ali tells a story of one believer who was really kind of an outlaw, actually. And he was an enemy of the cause. But he became a Baha'i. His name was Jan Iraqi. This man had been an enemy and now became a follower of the cause. He arose to serve the faith and make up for his past errors. This was in Iran. Once, while on a teaching trip, he was robbed of everything. On a teaching trip. And he thought, how can this happen? I'm serving, you know, Allah. And he looked up to the heavens and he said, oh God, is this any way to treat Abba John? Well, sometime later, this man received a tablet from Baha'u'llah. And Baha'u'llah said in that tablet, we heard your whispering. You are right. God will be with you and will confirm you. And new doors opened up to him and he had great success. So sometimes we get to our limit, you know. Is this any way to treat me? I'm trying to be a servant of the cause here. But that's all part of the deal. See, it's part of the deal. But whatever the deal, as Baha'u'llah said, thou shalt win the wager. Whatever the deal, thou shalt win the wager. In fact, in the Seven Valleys, Baha'u'llah said, a lover feareth nothing, and no harm can come nigh to him. Thou seest him chill in the fire and dry in the sea. That's the condition. Dry in the sea. Absolutely impervious to these tests and difficulties. They're going on all around us. We can't avoid that. But we're impervious because we're lovers, true lovers. The guardian said, these afflictions are part of human life. According to our teachings, one of their wisdoms is to teach us the impermanence of this world and the permanence of the spiritual bonds that we establish with God, His prophet, and those who are alive in the faith of God. You know, friends, if you want to serve the cause on the front line, when you want to volunteer to be part of a committee when your assembly asks you to serve, or you're elected to an assembly, or you're asked to be an assistant to the auxiliary board, or you're asked to teach children's classes, when you want to be on the front line serving this cause, you know what that means? That's like the soldiers. The ones on the front line get hit first and hardest. And when the bullets fly, both from inside the faith and from outside, the ones on the front line suffer the greatest casualties. Right? They get hit first. The bullets come like that when you're on the front line. And sometimes I hear the friends say, well, you know, I'm just trying to serve the faith. Hold it down a little, you know? But that's part of serving on the front line. The minute you step up to the front line, you get it. And you get it hard. And it's time after time, day after day. You try organizing something for this faith. You just give it. Bam, bam, bam. Right? That's part of serving. And your role is to absorb it. Because that stuff does no good, right? It does no good floating around out there, so your role on the front line is to absorb it and consume every wayward thought with the flame of His loving mention. So it's not floating around out there. So when you want to step up to the front line and you want to serve Baha'u'llah at the front, that's what happens. You get it and you get it hard and continuously. And that's part of that ransom. The cause surely needs sacrifices, the Guardian said. In fact, it's only through sacrifice that it can progress. Only through sacrifice. The Guardian said, a healthy social life and Baha'i work can go hand in hand. But not always in times of crisis, such as these days the cause is passing through. So give it up. Right? When great sacrifice can alone meet the demands of the situation. It's true, the Guardian said, the Baha'is should try and live a normal, healthy life. But we cannot for a moment overlook the abnormal state of the world. If there had not been believers ready to give their health, comfort, pleasure, everything for the cause in these dark days, the work would not have gone on. What are these sacrifices compared to keeping a beacon of light of Baha'u'llah burning? They're nothing. And don't think you're not up to it. Don't think you're not worthy of it. In fact, if you have a sense of inadequacy at all, the Guardian explains the wisdom of that. He said, so you see, your sense of inadequacy, your realization of your own unworthiness is not unique at all. Many from the highest to the humblest have had it. Now, the wisdom of it is this. It is such seemingly weak instruments that demonstrate that God is the power achieving the victories and not men. If you were a wealthy, prominent, strong individual who looked upon going out there as fun, any service you render and victories you have would be laid to your personality, not to the cause of God. But because the reverse is true, your services will be a witness to the power of Baha'u'llah, the truth of His faith. As Dr. Henderson was saying before, why do you suppose God chose America? Because nowhere, Shoghi Effendi, on earth is there a place more corrupt. Nowhere on earth is the racism worse. The Guardian said it. Nowhere on earth is the racism worse. So America was chosen to demonstrate the power of God. If God can do it here, the rest of the world is a cinch. It's the same thing in Iran. Why do you suppose Baha'u'llah came to Iran? Historians have said that Iran was the most despicable place on earth. Prostitution was practically legal in this Islamic country. They'd worked a method of this through the clergy. Bribery was the favorite indoor sport in Iran. And Baha'u'llah, this manifestation of God, appeared there to demonstrate once again the power of God. And you'll see, Abdu'l-Baha said that Persia will raise the banner of order and peace. The banner of public order waving in Iran. Can you imagine that vision that we have? That's the power of God. And that's the same as us individuals. That our sense of inadequacy that the wisdom in our feeling inadequate and unworthy, in God selecting us as the chosen servants, His chosen instruments, is this: that if we can do it, it's proof of the power of God. Friends, Abdu'l-Baha said, "Know that the blessings of the kingdom of Allah are not dependent upon the capacity or worthiness of anyone. Some souls who were less than drops became like waves of the great sea and manifested a storm equal to that of the ocean. In such cases, worthiness is of no importance." To launch this faith required tens of thousands of believers to shed their blood just to get this thing off the ground. And imagine what's ahead of us now. We're on the threshold of the beginning of that period called the Lesser Peace. To bring this world around to that is going to require a tremendous ransom. And we're the ones that God has chosen to do it. No one else on earth. We're the ones that are chosen to be the ransom. Not because of our great capacity or personalities, but in fact because we're very simple. So that it can be a proof of the power of God. Friends, I want to leave with two things. One is something from Baha'u'llah in the Four Valleys. Baha'u'llah quotes, "And if he feareth not God, God will make him to fear all things. Whereas all things fear him who feareth God." That's where our confidence comes from. That's where our capacity comes from. It comes from our fear of God. Our belief that nothing but that which profiteth them can befall his loved ones. That whatever the deal, thou shalt win the wager. We can't lose. And I want to say a prayer to end that I love so much because I know about all this stuff to some degree. I study it and I read about it and so on, about this ransom and sacrifice and adversities that are coming and will increase in intensity every year and are part of this dialectic of crisis and victory. But I have to say I'm still a little bit troubled. And so I say a prayer every day for protection from violent tests. And I want to say that prayer now. O compassionate God, thanks be to Thee, for Thou hast awakened and made me conscious. Thou hast given me a seeing eye and favored me with a hearing ear. Hast led me to Thy kingdom and guided me to Thy path. Thou hast shown me the right way and caused me to enter the ark of deliverance. O God, keep me steadfast and make me firm and staunch. Protect me from violent tests and preserve and shelter me in the strongly fortified fortress of Thy covenant and testament. Thou art the powerful, Thou art the seeing, Thou art the hearing. O Thou, the compassionate God, bestow upon me a heart which, like unto a glass, may be illumined with the light of Thy love, and confer upon me thoughts which may change this world into a rose garden through the outpourings of heavenly grace. Thou art the compassionate, the merciful, Thou art the great, beneficent God.